One ordinary morning like any other, Penny, an experienced nurse, was at home with her young daughter. Time passed peacefully in the house, and Penny had no idea that the events awaiting her would push her into a near-death journey she could never have imagined. With the confidence of someone who had become accustomed to emergency situations throughout her nursing career, Penny never thought that there would come a time when she herself would be the one needing rescue. Penny had previously experienced a dangerous anaphylactic shock due to a seafood allergy many years ago. That episode had almost taken her life, but since then, she hadn't encountered the same situation again. Although she always carried an EpiPen with her, as anyone with a history of severe allergies should, she kept it more as a precaution, never really thinking she'd have to use it. The pen lay dormant in her bag like a life preserver that had never been needed. That morning, Penny decided to make herself a smoothie as part of her daily routine. She sat on the sofa, enjoying the smoothie while her daughter played nearby. Everything was going as usual until Penny sensed that something wasn't right. The discomfort came suddenly and quickly, starting in her throat. At first, it was just a slight itch, but it soon escalated into a choking sensation. Her throat felt constricted, her breathing became short, and her heart began to race. Panic started spreading through Penny's body. With her nursing experience, Penny immediately realized that she was going into anaphylactic shock. She knew the severity of the situation, especially for someone with a history of severe allergies like hers. Without hesitation, Penny reached for her EpiPen and quickly injected herself with the first dose. She waited, hoping her body's reaction would subside after the injection. But instead, the situation worsened. Her breathing did not improve. In fact, it became increasingly difficult, as if every breath she took was a fierce battle to stay alive. Realizing that she could not control the situation on her own, Penny immediately called her son, asking him to take her to the hospital. Her son, filled with anxiety and panic, quickly drove her to the nearest hospital in the small town where they lived. Throughout the drive, Penny could feel her ability to breathe deteriorating rapidly. She gasped for air, her breath short and labored, as if there wasn't enough oxygen to sustain her. Her heartbeat raced, and before she knew it, her body began to tremble. Penny knew that if she didn't receive emergency treatment soon, she might not make it. When they arrived at the hospital, Penny was greeted by a nurse she recognized. But instead of feeling relief at being cared for by someone familiar, Penny realized that this nurse lacked the necessary understanding to handle the situation. Although she had already injected herself with the EpiPen, a basic step in treating anaphylactic shock, the nurse seemed confused and asked, "Why did you come here? You already used your EpiPen." Penny, as a critical care nurse herself, knew this was extremely dangerous. After administering the EpiPen, a patient needed to be closely monitored and treated immediately to prevent further deterioration. But instead of being rushed into the emergency room, Penny was asked to sit in the hallway and wait, with the promise that a bed would be available soon. Time continued to pass. Penny tried to stay calm, but anxiety and fear began to creep into her mind. The sensation of suffocation grew stronger. She tried to control herself, but it was impossible. Penny knew that her body was entering a state of emergency, but it seemed like no one in the hospital understood the severity of the situation. After a long, frustrating wait, she decided to inject herself with another dose of the EpiPen, hoping it would help her hold on until she could receive proper treatment. But things did not go as she had hoped. Her breathing became shorter and shorter, each breath turning into a terrifying challenge. Finally, a doctor approached and realized that Penny's condition was dire. They quickly moved her into the emergency room, but by this time, everything had progressed too far. Penny could feel her body slipping into a state of collapse. The doctors tried to insert an IV line to administer medication, but the anaphylactic shock had caused her body to clamp down, narrowing the blood vessels and making it nearly impossible to get the IV in. Things deteriorated rapidly, and by the time the doctors realized she needed to be intubated to maintain her breathing, it was already too late. Penny stopped breathing. In that moment, Penny felt herself being separated from her body. All the pain, panic, and fear suddenly disappeared. She was no longer inside her own body. Instead, she was standing there, looking down at herself lying on the hospital bed, surrounded by doctors and nurses trying to save her. Strangely, Penny didn't feel anxious or distressed as she watched the scene unfold. In fact, she didn't immediately realize that the woman lying there was her. Penny felt a sense of relief, as if she were floating in a peaceful, unusual state. She looked down at everything from above, like an observer from the outside, no longer connected to the events happening below. The sounds of the machines and the voices of the doctors faded away, as if they were coming from a distant world. Penny saw it all, yet she felt completely detached from the scene. The sounds gradually quieted down, and everything around Penny grew darker. She felt herself being drawn into an infinite void where there was no light, no form, and time seemed to lose all meaning. She no longer knew how long she had been in this state. A sense of loneliness began to spread. There was no pain, but there was also no comfort. Only an endless emptiness surrounded her, and Penny began to wonder if she still existed. In the darkness, she tried to move but couldn't. She realized that she was trapped, with no way out, not knowing where to go or what to do. Time stretched on endlessly, and Penny's mind became filled with questions. Was this the end for her? Had the life she lived been just a dream, and now the dream was over? Penny tried to recall her previous life, but the memories became blurred and hard to grasp. She was no longer sure of anything. It felt as if she had never truly lived. She couldn't define reality, nor could she find a way out of the infinite darkness surrounding her. A strange emptiness took over Penny's mind, and she no longer knew if there was any escape at all. Penny felt as though time had been torn apart, and all concepts of reality vanished into the deep abyss of surrounding darkness. She had no idea how long she had been drifting in this undefined space. At times, Penny felt as if time had stopped, and at other moments, it seemed to rush by uncontrollably. Everything became unfamiliar, and she couldn't perceive reality anymore. Penny seemed to lose the ability to sense herself and the world around her, leaving her with nothing but a vague feeling of existence. In that state, Penny began to search for a reason, an answer for her presence there. She no longer felt her body or had any interaction with the physical world. The only thing she could sense was the heavy weight of darkness pressing down on her, making her feel trapped. Penny tried to move, but each step forward brought exhaustion and mental pain. Every effort only prolonged her despair, making her feel as if she was sinking deeper into this endless space. The feeling of isolation began to seep further into Penny's mind. She could no longer determine a direction or a way to escape. She wondered if she was still alive or had crossed over to the other side. Penny realized that she had been imprisoned in this dark space for so long that she couldn't remember anything about her previous life. Her memories of who she was began to fade. Had she really lived, or was she just a lost soul drifting in unconsciousness? Penny searched for answers, but there was nothing present in her mind but emptiness. After what felt like an eternity of confronting this overwhelming isolation, Penny began to reflect on the events that had brought her here. She remembered that she had once lived a tumultuous life. After her painful divorce from her ex-husband, Penny had built an emotional wall around herself to protect both her and her children. She tried to be strong, to be the perfect mother and an independent woman. But this determination gradually led her into isolation, causing her to withdraw and cut herself off from those around her. Penny realized that all this time, she had been living in a self-created loneliness. After the divorce, she became closed off, focusing solely on her work and children. She no longer opened her heart to anyone, no longer believed in love or the care of others. That loneliness had become an inseparable part of Penny's life, and now it had followed her into the spiritual realm. Penny suddenly realized that the endless darkness surrounding her wasn't just a physical space, but a manifestation of the isolation she had built within herself over the years. This realization filled Penny with fear and guilt. She wondered if she had created this hell for herself. The feeling of being trapped in darkness was a reflection of the life she had lived on Earth, a life enclosed by the walls she had erected to protect herself. Penny understood that those walls not only shielded her from pain, but also prevented her from experiencing love, connection, and compassion. Friends, colleagues, and even her loved ones had been pushed away by her. The awareness of this truth shook Penny's soul. She recalled each moment when she had refused to help, refused to listen, and even refused the love of those around her. The isolation she had endured wasn't solely due to circumstances, but was also her own choice. Penny gradually understood that to escape this dark space, she needed to confront her decisions and actions. But how could she change what had already happened? How could she escape this self-imposed punishment? As Penny struggled with these chaotic thoughts and emotions, something miraculous happened. A faint sound echoed from afar, as if the darkness around her was beginning to tremble. Penny sensed a change in the atmosphere. The darkness started to quiver and break apart into small fragments. Those dark pieces gradually dissolved, giving way to a faint light emerging in the distance. At first, the light was just a few dim rays, but it steadily grew stronger, pushing away the oppressive darkness. In that light, Penny saw a blurry figure approaching. She focused on the image, and as the light became clearer, Penny realized it was a woman with vibrant orange hair. The woman's hair burned like small flames, creating a mesmerizing sight. Penny felt a powerful pull from this woman, as if an invisible cord was drawing her closer. Unable to resist, Penny moved toward the woman and immediately felt an unprecedented sense of peace. The radiant woman opened her arms and embraced Penny. As the woman's arms wrapped around her, Penny felt a warmth spreading throughout her body. In that moment, she realized that this woman was none other than her grandmother, the person she had loved dearly throughout her life but had lost long ago. Penny burst into tears. The tears didn't fall from pain or fear, but from the joy of reuniting with her beloved grandmother. In her grandmother's embrace, Penny no longer felt alone. The shards of darkness continued to fly around, but whenever they drew near, they were repelled by the energy radiating from her grandmother. Penny felt the unconditional love her grandmother had for her, and she began to realize that perhaps she wasn't entirely lost. Her grandmother didn't speak, but her thoughts were transmitted to Penny's mind clearly. She told Penny that all the pain, isolation, and fear she had endured were only temporary. Penny's life wasn't over. Her presence in this world hadn't ended, and she could return if she was willing to open her heart. Penny continued to cry, but this time they were tears of peace. She understood that she could escape this dark space, but it would require her to change from deep within her soul. Penny felt comforted and at ease, and in that moment she no longer felt trapped. The light from her grandmother gradually enveloped Penny, and she began to feel that she was ready to face the profound changes ahead. However, the path she had to walk was still long, and Penny knew that this was just the beginning of a much deeper journey. As Penny remained in her grandmother's embrace, a sense of peace and comfort spread throughout her being. The darkness that had once enveloped everything had now dissipated, leaving behind a space filled with soft light. Penny no longer felt the loneliness and isolation she once did. At the same time, she knew that her grandmother's presence was not just a simple reunion. Penny was aware that this encounter carried a much deeper meaning. It was an opportunity for her to understand herself and the life she had lived more clearly. After a moment of silence, her grandmother loosened her embrace, and although she said nothing aloud, her thoughts and emotions were conveyed to Penny with perfect clarity. Penny realized that this was not the final place she belonged. Her grandmother had come not just to comfort her, but to guide her toward a deeper understanding of life and her actions. "You are not dead, Penny," her grandmother gently communicated in her mind. "Life never truly ends. It simply transitions from one state to another. You are standing on the edge between life and death, but there is still a thread connecting you to the life you once knew. If you choose, you can go back." Penny listened, and a sense of relief filled her heart. She still had a chance to return, to continue the life she had paused during this crisis. But she knew that if she chose the path back, her life would never be the same. Everything she had experienced in this spiritual realm had changed her forever. It was not merely an encounter with death. It was a confrontation with the truth of who she was. In that moment, the light around Penny began to shift, becoming brighter and more powerful. A sound like thunder echoed across the space, and Penny sensed the presence of a divine force. It was an energy so strong that everything in the universe seemed to tremble. Penny could not see this being, but she felt the presence of God, a presence that was both awe-inspiring and filled with love. Penny had always imagined God as an omnipotent being, but the feeling she now received wasn't fear or insignificance in the face of divine power. Instead, she felt a profound spiritual nourishment, as if her life had been merged into a greater existence. "I am the Almighty," the voice echoed in her mind. Only 3 short words, but they seemed to shake the entire universe. Each word reverberated with cosmic energy, rippling like waves that touched every cell in Penny's body. The feeling was not just sound, but resonance, a sprouting of life in every breath she took. Penny felt consumed by the strength of the voice, but instead of fear, she felt reassured. She had feared that God would judge her for her past mistakes, for the things she had once felt ashamed of and guilty for. But in this presence, Penny realized there was no judgment. Instead, she felt an unconditional forgiveness. She no longer felt criticized or condemned, but enveloped by an infinite love. Even so, Penny could not completely shake her feelings of self-blame. She had carried her pain and resentment for many years, particularly the wounds inflicted by her ex-husband. Penny clearly saw images from her past, moments when she had faced loneliness after her divorce, when she had to witness her children being abandoned by their father. She recalled the times when her children waited for gifts from their father, only to be met with disappointment when promises were never fulfilled. Penny remembered the anger and frustration she had felt seeing her children endure their father's neglect. She had harbored resentment toward her ex-husband, and deep down, she also felt abandoned by God. She couldn't understand why an all-powerful being would allow innocent children to suffer such pain. In that moment, Penny's mind posed the question, how could God let this happen? And as if in immediate response, God's voice spoke again, this time softer, more intimate. "You have misunderstood me." A vision appeared before Penny's eyes, she and her eldest son David sitting on a bench at a soccer field. David turned to Penny, his eyes serious and his voice heavy with emotion. "Mom, I will become the father I deserve to have." In that moment, Penny understood that the suffering her son had endured was not in vain. It was the pain of the past that had driven David to become a better father, a loving and responsible one. Penny saw an image of her grandson, Cole, running on the soccer field with innocent joy, sunlight shining on his hair. The scene made Penny choke up with emotion. Everything began to make sense. The hardships of life did not always have easy answers, but they always had a higher purpose. Penny realized that every event in her life, whether good or bad, had contributed to her spiritual growth and that of those around her. During this journey, she had learned that the definitions of good and bad were not as she once thought. Good was not about perfection or the absence of pain, but about progress, about the journey of growth even in the harshest circumstances. In that moment, Penny understood that her life was not over. She had the chance to return, to change, to do better than she had before. She could go back to the real world and live a life with deeper awareness, with love and forgiveness. Penny sensed that the road ahead would not be easy, but she was ready to face it. Penny spoke to God, "Please let me remember all of this." She feared that if she couldn't remember what she had experienced here, she would lose the hope and strength to continue. And then Penny felt herself returning. The light gradually faded, and she found herself lying in a hospital bed. Her eyes opened, and she saw the familiar face of her sister standing by the bed. Penny softly said, "Sister, I have been with God." In that moment, she understood that her journey was not just a short trip through the spiritual realm, but a profound transformation of her soul. Penny knew she would face challenges upon returning to the real world, but now she possessed a new understanding and an unconditional love from God.